The blood-soaked letter trembled in Josephine Carter's hands as she collapsed onto the weathered porch of her family's ranch outside Newton, Colorado. The year was 1879, and the telegram confirmed what she had feared for months: her father was dead, murdered by the same ruthless gang that had been terrorizing ranchers throughout the territory. "Pa," she whispered, tears streaming down her dust-stained cheeks. The mountain air felt suddenly cold despite the June sunshine. At 22, Josephine Josie, to those who knew her, was now completely alone, with nothing but a struggling cattle ranch and memories of better days. 3 miles away, Forrest Evans rode hard toward the Carter place, his hat pulled low against the afternoon sun. At 27, his reputation as one of the fastest guns in the territory was well earned, though he'd sworn to hang up his pistols after taking a job as ranch foreman for Old Man Wilkins. The sound of his horses' hooves pounded a steady rhythm on the hard, packed earth as he followed the creek that separated the properties. Forrest had promised Samuel Carter he'd look after Josie if anything happened. That promise weighed heavy on him now as the Carter homestead came into view. The small house with its stone chimney stood against the backdrop of distant mountains, smoke curling lazily from the stovepipe. He'd been on his way to Newton when he'd heard the news about Samuel. Redirecting his horse toward the Carter ranch had been instinctive, though he knew his reception might be cold. Josie Carter had made it clear on more than one occasion that she didn't need his help, or any man's for that matter. Josie heard the horse before she saw the rider. She quickly wiped her tears, tucking the telegram into her pocket and reaching for the Winchester that rested against the porch rail. Standing, she cradled the rifle in her arms, not aiming but making it clear she was prepared. The rider came into full view, and Josie's grip on the rifle tightened. Forrest Evans. Of course it would be him. The man her father had trusted most, yet the one who'd left them 2 years ago without so much as a proper goodbye. "Miss Carter," Forrest called, pulling his horse to a stop several yards from the porch. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair and a face weathered by sun and wind. "I heard about your father. I'm powerful sorry." Josie's jaw clenched. "Thank you kindly for your condolences, Mr. Evans. Now, if you don't mind, I've got work to do." She turned to go inside. "Josie, wait." His voice was softer now. "Samuel was a good man, one of the best I ever knew." She paused, her hand on the doorknob. "Yes, he was. I know you probably don't want me here, but I made a promise to your father." Josie turned back, her green eyes flashing. "A promise? Like the one you made when you said you'd stay on and help with the ranch?" "That kind of promise, Mr. Evans." Forrest dismounted, tying his horse to the hitching post. "I deserved that, but things were complicated then. Things are complicated now." Josie's voice cracked. "My father is dead. The bank is threatening foreclosure, and the men who killed him are still out there. The McKendrick gang," she nodded, brushing a strand of auburn hair from her face. "They wanted our water rights. Pa refused to sell." Forrest took a step toward the porch, stopping when Josie raised the rifle slightly. "I'm not here to take anything from you, Josie. I'm here to help. I don't need your help." The words came out sharper than she intended, but the pain was still too raw. "Maybe not," he said quietly, "but I need to give it for Samuel. And for me." Their eyes locked, and for a moment, Josie saw something in his gaze that made her heart flutter, a mixture of determination and something else she couldn't quite name. "You can stay for supper," she finally said, lowering the rifle. "After that, we'll see." Forrest nodded, relief evident on his face. "Thank you." Inside the modest home, Josie moved about the kitchen with practiced efficiency, trying to ignore Forrest's presence as he sat at the table, hat in his hands. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken words. "I can go into town tomorrow," he offered, watching as she sliced bread. "Talk to Sheriff Miller about what happened to your father." Josie laughed bitterly. "Sheriff Miller couldn't find his own badge if it was pinned to his chest. He claims there's no evidence linking the McKendricks to Pa's murder. Then we'll find the evidence ourselves." She turned to face him, knife still in hand. There is no we, Forrest. You left, remember? 2 years of silence makes it pretty clear where you stand. Forrest's expression darkened. I had my reasons. Which were, he looked away, studying the worn floorboards. It's complicated. It always is with men like you. She turned back to her task, shoulders rigid with tension. They ate supper in relative silence, the only sounds the clink of utensils against plates and the occasional creak of the house settling. When they finished, Forrest insisted on washing the dishes while Josie sat at the table, a cup of coffee warming her hands. The cattle look good, he commented, trying to ease the tension. Samuel always had an eye for quality stock. We're down to 30 head, Josie admitted reluctantly. Had to sell most of them last winter when the feed ran short. Forrest dried his hands on a towel. 30 head won't be enough to hold off the bank. You think I don't know that? Josie's voice trembled. I've been working myself to the bone trying to keep this place afloat while Pa was. She couldn't finish the sentence. While he was what, Josie? Forrest asked gently. She looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. While he was dying. He was sick, Forrest, had been for months. The McKendricks knew it too. They knew he was weak. Forrest cursed under his breath. Samuel never said anything in his letters. Letters? Josie's expression changed from grief to confusion. You wrote to my father? Every month for the past 2 years, Forrest confirmed, and he wrote back. The revelation hit Josie like a physical blow. All this time, she'd believed Forrest had simply forgotten them, moved on without a backward glance. To learn that he and her father had maintained a correspondence was almost too much to bear. Why didn't he tell me? She whispered. Forrest took the seat across from her. I asked him not to. It was safer that way. Safer? What does that mean? He hesitated, clearly wrestling with how much to reveal. I had to leave Newton because I had men after me, bad men. I didn't want to bring that trouble to your door. So instead you just disappeared. It wasn't easy, Josie. Leaving you, he stopped himself. Leaving was the hardest thing I've ever done. The way he looked at her then made her heart race. She remembered all too well the feelings she'd harbored for her father's young foreman, feelings she'd buried deep when he'd vanished from her life. It's getting late, she said abruptly, standing. You can sleep in the barn, there's fresh hay in the loft. Forrest nodded, accepting the dismissal. I'll be gone at first light. Check the north pasture, make sure your fences are holding. You don't need to do that. I know. He stood, reaching for his hat. But I'm going to anyway. At the door, he paused. Josie, I meant what I said. I'm here to help. Whatever it takes. She didn't respond, just watched as he crossed the yard to the barn, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the setting sun. Only when he disappeared from sight did she allow herself to feel the emotions she'd been suppressing: grief for her father, anger at Forrest for leaving, and a terrible, unwelcome sense of relief that he had returned. Josie slept fitfully that night, dreams filled with her father's face and the sound of gunshots. She woke before dawn, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding. Pulling on her clothes, she moved quietly through the house, determined to start her chores before Forrest could intrude on her routine. But as she stepped onto the porch, she saw him already at work, leading her horse from the corral to the water trough. He moved with the easy grace of a man comfortable in his own skin, at home in the early morning light. You're up early, she called, descending the steps. Forrest looked up, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Never could sleep past sunrise. Your pa used to say it was a sickness. The casual mention of her father brought a fresh wave of pain, but also a strange comfort. He said the same about me. They worked in tandem through the morning, falling into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Forrest mended fences while Josie tended to the chickens and milked the cow. By midday, they had accomplished more than Josie typically managed alone in 3 days. As they sat in the shade of an old oak tree, sharing a simple lunch of bread and cheese, Forrest broached the subject they'd both been avoiding. We need to talk about what happens next, Josie. She took a sip from her canteen, eyes fixed on the distant mountains. What happens next is I keep running this ranch just like I promised Pa. And the McKendricks, What about them? Forrest's expression hardened. They killed your father, they'll come for the ranch next. Let them try. Josie's hand instinctively moved to the knife at her belt. That's not a fight you can win alone, he said gently. I'm not alone, she shot back. I have neighbors who'll stand with me. Like the Wilkins, the Petersons, Forrest shook his head. They're good folks, but they've got their own troubles. And they're scared of the McKendricks, same as everyone else in this valley. So what do you suggest? That I just give up, sell to the first buyer who comes along? No, his voice was firm. I'm suggesting you let me help you fight. Josie studied him, trying to see past the weathered exterior to the man beneath. Why would you do that? What's in it for you? For a moment, Forrest looked like he might say something important, something that would change everything between them. Instead, he stood, brushing crumbs from his pants. Your father saved my life once. I owe him a debt. Is that all? She couldn't keep the disappointment from her voice. His eyes met hers, intense and unwavering. No, that's not all, but the rest will have to wait. Before she could press him further, the sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. 3 riders appeared on the horizon, coming fast down the road toward the ranch. Forrest's hand moved to his gun. Get to the house. Now, this is my property, Josie protested. I'm not hiding. He muttered something under his breath about stubborn women, but didn't argue further. Instead, he positioned himself slightly in front of her, his stance casual but alert as the riders approached. Josie recognized the lead rider immediately, Elias McKendrick, the oldest son of the clan patriarch. His reputation for cruelty was well known throughout the territory. The 2 men flanking him were strangers to her, but the guns strapped to their hips told her all she needed to know. Well, well, Elias called as they drew near. If it ain't the orphan girl and… He squinted at Forrest, recognition slowly dawning. I'll be damned. Forrest Evans, thought you'd left these parts for good. Just visiting an old friend, Forrest replied, his voice deceptively calm. What brings you to the Carter place, McKendrick? Elias dismounted, his spurs jangling as his boots hit the ground. He was a tall man with cold eyes and a smile that never reached them. Came to pay my respects to Miss Carter here, heard about her pa's unfortunate accident. It wasn't an accident, Josie said, her voice steady despite the fury burning inside her. It was murder, your murder. Elias placed a hand over his heart in mock offense. That's a serious accusation, Miss Carter. Got any proof to back it up? We both know what happened, she responded. What I know, Elias said, taking a step closer, is that this valley is changing. Progress is coming whether folks like it or not. Your pa was too stubborn to see that. Forrest's hand remained near his gun. Say your piece and move on, McKendrick. Miss Carter's had enough trouble. Oh, I intend to. Elias pulled a folded document from his vest pocket. Just brought a little business proposition. Since you're all alone now, Miss Carter thought you might want to reconsider my offer for your water rights. Not interested. Josie didn't even look at the paper. Elias's smile tightened. That's a shame. Banking on sentiment can be a risky business, especially with the bank calling in loans all over the county. The threat wasn't subtle. Josie knew the McKendricks had influence with the bank in Newton, just as they had influence with the sheriff and the territorial judge. Miss Carter gave you her answer, Forrest said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. I suggest you respect it. For a long moment, the 2 men stared at each other, the tension crackling between them like lightning before a storm. Then Elias laughed, a sound devoid of humor. You always did have more courage than sense, Evans. He folded the paper and tucked it back into his vest. My offer stands, Miss Carter, for now, but times are hard and they're likely to get harder. He tipped his hat mockingly. Think on it, I'll be back. As they rode away, Josie released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That's the man who killed my father, she said quietly. Forrest nodded, his expression grim. I believe you, but believing and proving are 2 different things. So what do we do? He turned to her, his decision made. First, we secure the ranch, then we find the proof we need to bring McKendrick to justice. And if we can't find it… Forrest's eyes darkened. Then we find another way. The air between them shifted, an unspoken understanding forming. They were in this together now, for better or worse. That evening, Josie invited Forrest to sleep in the small guest room rather than the barn. It was a practical decision, she told herself. With the McKendricks making threats, having Forrest close by made sense. But as she lay in her own bed that night, listening to the creaks and groans of the old house, she acknowledged the truth she'd been avoiding all day. Despite everything, the pain of his departure, the 2 years of silence, she still felt something for Forrest Evans. Something that went beyond gratitude for his help or respect for his abilities. Something that frightened her far more than Elias McKendrick ever could. The next morning brought a new determination. Over breakfast, Forrest and Josie mapped out a plan. They would ride into Newton, speak with Sheriff Miller, and make inquiries about Samuel's death. Then they would visit the bank to assess the state of the ranch's finances. "We should speak with your father's lawyer too," Forrest suggested as they saddled their horses. "Make sure the property transfers to you cleanly." Josie nodded, though the thought of formally inheriting the ranch made her father's death feel more permanent somehow. "Mr. Hollister. His office is on Main Street." They rode side by side, the early morning sun casting long shadows across the rolling landscape. Josie couldn't help stealing glances at Forrest. He sat tall in the saddle, his profile strong against the backdrop of endless sky. "You've changed," she said suddenly. He looked over at her, eyebrow raised. "How so? You're quieter, more." She searched for the right word, deliberate. A smile tugged at his lips. "That a fancy way of saying I've slowed down in my old age. You know what I mean. You used to be so quick to laugh, quick to anger too. Now you seem more careful," he supplied. "Yes, careful." Forrest was silent for a moment, considering. 2 years on the run changes a man, makes him think twice before speaking or acting. "Were you really on the run all that time?" He nodded. "The Colbert brothers had a blood oath against me, had to make sure they were dealt with before I could even think about coming back." "Dealt with?" Josie raised an eyebrow. "You kill them?" "No." His answer was firm, "but I made sure they'd never bother me or anyone I care about again." The way he said it, with such quiet certainty, sent a shiver down Josie's spine. This was a different Forrest than the young hothead who'd worked for her father years ago. This man had seen things, done things that had marked him. Newton appeared on the horizon, a small but growing town nestled in the valley. Like many settlements in the Colorado Territory, it had sprung up around mining operations before transitioning to a trade center for the surrounding ranches. Main Street boasted a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, and various other businesses catering to the needs of the locals. They tied their horses outside the sheriff's office, a modest building with a weathered sign swinging in the breeze. Sheriff Miller was behind his desk, feet propped up, hat tilted forward over his eyes. At their entrance, he startled awake, nearly toppling from his chair. "Miss Carter," he stammered, straightening his vest. "Didn't expect to see you in town so soon after." His eyes flicked to Forrest, narrowing slightly. "Evans, heard you were back." "Sheriff." Forrest's acknowledgement was curt. Josie stepped forward. "We're here about my father's murder." Miller's expression turned guarded. "Now, Miss Carter, I understand you're grieving, but there's no evidence of foul play. The doctor said it was his heart. His heart gave out because someone beat him half to death first," Josie interrupted, her voice tight with anger. "And we both know who did it." The sheriff's eyes darted nervously toward the window. "You can't go around making accusations without proof, especially against men like the McKendricks." "So you're not even going to investigate?" Forrest asked, his tone dangerously calm. Miller stood, puffing out his chest in a show of authority that fooled no one. "I did investigate. Talked to Doc Winters, checked the scene. Sometimes bad things just happen, Miss Carter. This territory ain't for the faint of heart." "My father wasn't faint of heart," Josie said, stepping closer to the desk. "He was the strongest man I've ever known, and he was murdered because he wouldn't sell his water rights to Travis McKendrick." "That's enough." Miller's face had reddened. "I won't have you spreading slander in my town." The McKendricks are respected businessmen who have brought prosperity to this valley. Prosperity for who? Forrest challenged. Seems to me they've brought nothing but trouble for folks who stand in their way. The sheriff pointed to the door. I think you two better leave. I've said all I'm going to say on the matter. Outside, Josie kicked at the dirt in frustration. That went exactly as I expected. The McKendricks have him in their pocket, Forrest agreed, guiding her toward the bank. But that doesn't mean we give up. The bank proved equally discouraging. The manager, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, informed Josie that her father's loan was indeed being called due. But we've never missed a payment, she protested. The terms give us another 3 years. The manager, Mr. Peterson, cleared his throat nervously. I'm afraid the bank reserves the right to revise terms in the event of a change in ownership. With your father's passing, the property transitions to you and well. The board has concerns about a young woman managing such a significant operation alone. That's ridiculous, Josie fumed. I've been running that ranch alongside my father for years. Nevertheless, the decision has been made. You have 30 days to settle the outstanding balance or the property will go to auction. As they left the bank, Josie's hands were shaking with fury. 30 days. How am I supposed to raise that kind of money in 30 days? Forrest guided her to a bench outside the general store away from curious ears. We'll figure something out. Maybe we can sell some of the cattle, or it wouldn't be enough, Josie cut in. Not nearly enough. Forrest was quiet for a moment, thinking, what about your mother's family back east? Could they help? Josie shook her head. They disowned her when she married Pa. Haven't heard from them since I was a child. The situation seemed impossible, but Forrest wasn't ready to give up. Let's talk to Hollister. Maybe there's a legal way to fight this. But the lawyer's office offered little hope. Mr. Hollister, a kindly older gentleman who had been Samuel's friend for many years, confirmed what they already suspected: the McKendricks had significant influence over the bank. I don't like to speak ill of anyone, he said, pouring them each a small glass of whiskey, but Travis McKendrick has been systematically acquiring properties throughout this valley for years. Sometimes through legitimate purchase, sometimes through other means, like murder. Josie asked bluntly. Hollister sighed. I couldn't say that for certain, but I've seen too many honest ranchers suddenly sell out or lose their land under suspicious circumstances. What about legal options? Forrest pressed. Can Josie challenge the bank's decision to call in the loan? The lawyer swirled the amber liquid in his glass, considering. You could try, but the courts move slowly and the McKendricks have friends in high places. By the time you got a hearing, the 30 days would be long past. They left Hollister's office with heavy hearts, the weight of their situation pressing down on them. The sun was sinking toward the western horizon as they collected their horses. One more stop, Forrest said, nodding toward the saloon. I want to see if there's any gossip about your father's death. People talk freely when they're drinking. Josie hesitated. The Wild Horse isn't a place for women. You wait here then, I won't be long. No, her decision was firm. We're in this together, remember. Forrest looked like he might argue, then nodded. Stay close to me, and let me do the talking. The Wild Horse Saloon was busy despite the early hour, filled with miners, cowboys, and various other denizens of Newton. Conversation faltered briefly as Josie entered on Forrest's arm, but quickly resumed. While not common, it wasn't unheard of for a respectable woman to enter such an establishment, especially if accompanied by a man. They made their way to the bar, where Forrest ordered 2 beers. The bartender, a burly man with an impressive mustache, studied them curiously. Haven't seen you around in a while, Evans, he remarked, sliding the drinks across the counter. Been away on business, George. Forrest took a sip of his beer. Heard about Samuel Carter while I was gone. George's expression sobered. Damn shame that. Samuel was a good man. He nodded respectfully to Josie. Begging your pardon, miss. Thank you, she said quietly. Did you know my father well? Well enough to know he didn't deserve what happened to him. Forrest leaned in slightly. What exactly did happen, George? Sheriff Miller seems to think it was natural causes. The bartender snorted. Sheriff Miller wouldn't know his backside from a hole in the ground. Everyone in town knows Samuel was beaten something fierce before he died. Everyone knows, Josie repeated, her voice tight, yet no one does anything about it. George looked uncomfortable. It's not that simple, Miss Carter. The McKendricks, they own half the town. A man speaks up, he might find himself without a job or worse. Who found my father? Josie asked suddenly. The sheriff wouldn't tell me. Old Pete Wilson. He was delivering supplies from the general store when he came across Samuel on the road, said he'd been worked over good. Forrest finished his beer. Pete still living out by the creek, George nodded. Same place. But he's a nervous sort, might not want to talk about it. He'll talk to me, Josie said with determination. As they made their way back through the crowded room, a man at one of the tables stuck out his boot, blocking their path. Forrest stopped, placing a protective hand on Josie's arm. Well, if it ain't the Carter girl and her hired gun, the man drawled, his words slurring slightly from drink. He was one of the men who had accompanied Elias McKendrick to the ranch the day before. Forrest's voice was soft but carried a clear warning. Move your foot, Jackson. The man's eyes narrowed. Or what? You gonna shoot me right here in front of everybody? He looked at Josie, his gaze lingering offensively. You know, your pa might still be alive if he'd just taken the boss's offer. Shame you seem just as stubborn. Josie felt Forrest tense beside her, saw his hand hover near his gun. Forrest, don't, she murmured. He's not worth it. For a moment she thought he might ignore her. Then, with deliberate calm, Forrest reached down and shoved the man's boot aside. Next time you get in our way, you won't walk away so easily. Outside, the evening air was a welcome relief from the smoky confines of the saloon. Josie took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. We should head back to the ranch, she said. It'll be dark soon. Forrest nodded, but his mind seemed elsewhere. Josie, about what happened in there. You didn't have to defend my honor, she said quickly. I can handle men like that. I know you can. He helped her mount her horse, but that doesn't mean you should have to. They rode in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. The situation seemed increasingly desperate, no help from the sheriff, the bank calling in the loan, and the McKendricks making their intentions clear. We'll visit Pete Wilson tomorrow, Forrest finally said as the ranch came into view. Maybe he saw something that can help us. Josie nodded, too exhausted to speak. The events of the day had drained her completely. That night, after a simple supper, they sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast Colorado sky. The night was still, broken only by the occasional call of a coyote in the distance. My father loved nights like this, Josie said softly. Said you could hear God thinking if you listened hard enough, Forrest smiled. Sounds like Samuel, he always did have a way with words. He liked you, you know. She glanced over at him. Even after you left, never said a bad word about you. He was a better man than I deserved. Why did you really leave, Forrest? The question had been burning in her mind all day. Was it just about the Colbert brothers, or was there more to it? He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough with emotion. I left because I had to, because staying would have put you in danger. He looked at her then, his eyes reflecting the moonlight, and because I cared for you too much to risk that. Josie's heart stuttered in her chest. You cared for me more than I had any right to. You were the boss's daughter, barely 20 years old. I was a man with a price on my head and blood on my hands. That didn't matter to me, she whispered. It mattered to me. His gaze was intense. You deserved better than a life looking over your shoulder, waiting for trouble to find us. And now, she hardly dared to ask, Forrest reached out, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face with a gentleness that made her breath catch. Now I'm here to stay if you'll have me. The moment hung between them, fragile and precious. Then Josie leaned forward, her lips meeting his in a kiss that spoke of longing and lost time, of newfound hope and possibilities neither had dared to imagine. When they finally parted, Josie rested her forehead against his. We still have so many problems to solve. "We'll solve them together," he promised. One day at a time, she believed him. For the first time since her father's death, Josie felt something other than grief and fear. She felt hope. The next morning dawned clear and crisp. Josie woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, finding Forrest already at work in the kitchen. The domesticity of the scene struck her, bringing both a smile to her lips and an ache to her heart. How different things might have been if he'd never left. "Morning," he greeted her, his own smile warming his eyes. "Thought you could use a good breakfast before we ride out to Pete Wilson's place." They ate companionably, discussing the day ahead. The kiss they'd shared the night before had changed something fundamental between them, easing the tension that had lingered since Forrest's return. After breakfast, they set about their morning chores, working together with an efficiency that came from years of ranch life. By mid-morning they were ready to ride. Pete Wilson's small homestead was about an hour's ride from the Carter ranch, nestled against a stand of cottonwoods near the creek. As they approached, they could see the old man sitting on his porch, whittling a piece of wood. He looked up as they dismounted, his weathered face creasing in a frown. "Figured you'd be coming around sooner or later," he called, setting aside his project. "Though I don't know what good it'll do, Mr. Wilson," Josie greeted him, removing her hat. "We just want to ask you about my father." The old man sighed, gesturing for them to join him on the porch. "Awful thing, what happened to Samuel. He was a good neighbor." "You found him," Forrest said, taking a seat on the porch step. "Can you tell us what you saw?" Pete glanced nervously toward the road before answering. "Found him by the bend in the creek, not far from the McKendrick property line. He'd been beaten something terrible, face all swollen, ribs likely broken, but he was alive, barely." Josie's hand went to her mouth. "Did he say anything?" "That's the thing that's been eating at me," Pete admitted. "He did say something right before the end, said tell Josie it was Elias, then he just slipped away." The confirmation of what Josie had already suspected hit her like a physical blow. Her father had named his killer with his dying breath. "Why didn't you tell the sheriff this?" Forrest demanded, anger evident in his voice. Pete looked down, shame clear on his face. "I did at first, but then Elias McKendrick paid me a visit that same night, said if I repeated Samuel's words to anyone else I'd be joining him in the ground." "So you lied," Josie said flatly. "I'm an old man," Pete said weakly. "I got no one to look after me if trouble comes." Forrest stood, disgusted. "You're the only witness to a murder and you let the killer walk free because you were scared." "You don't understand what the McKendricks are capable of." "I understand perfectly," Forrest cut him off. "Men like them thrive because good people do nothing." Josie placed a restraining hand on Forrest's arm. "It's not too late to make this right, Mr. Wilson. Would you be willing to testify to what you heard? If we can get the territorial marshal involved, bypass Sheriff Miller entirely." The old man looked conflicted, tugging at his beard nervously. "The marshal's office is 3 days' ride from here. And even then, there's no guarantee they'd act against the McKendricks." "But if they did," Forrest pressed, "would you tell them the truth? For Samuel's sake." After a long moment, Pete nodded. "For Samuel, but you two need to be careful. The McKendricks won't take kindly to you stirring up trouble." They thanked the old man and rode away, both lost in thought. Pete's confirmation of Elias's guilt provided a direction for their efforts, but also highlighted the danger they faced. "We need to send word to the marshal's office," Josie said as they followed the creek back toward her property. "Let them know what happened to Pa." Forrest nodded. "I can ride to Denver, deliver the message personally, make sure they understand the urgency." The thought of him leaving again, even temporarily, sent a pang of fear through Josie. "What if the McKendricks come while you're gone?" "We'll make sure the ranch is secure before I leave, and I'll be back as quick as I can." He reached across the space between their horses, taking her hand in his. "I promise." The sincerity in his eyes eased her worries somewhat. "When will you go?" "Tomorrow. The sooner we get the marshal involved, the better." He squeezed her hand. "Tonight, we'll plan how to keep you safe while I'm gone." As they approached the ranch, however, both immediately sensed that something was wrong. Smoke was rising from behind the barn, too much smoke for a normal fire. They spurred their horses forward, racing across the pasture. As they crested the small rise that led to the ranch buildings, Josie gasped in horror. The hay shed was engulfed in flames, the fire threatening to spread to the nearby barn. They dismounted in a rush, running toward the well to begin a bucket line. For the next hour, they fought desperately to contain the blaze, eventually succeeding in saving the barn, though the hay shed was a complete loss. Exhausted and smoke-stained, Josie sank to the ground, watching as the last embers smoldered. "This wasn't an accident," she said, her voice hoarse from the smoke. "The McKendricks are sending a message." Forrest knelt beside her, his expression grim. "A warning of what's to come if we don't back down." "I won't sell to them," Josie said fiercely. "Not now, not ever, I know." He helped her to her feet. "Let's get cleaned up, then we need to prepare for what comes next." Inside the house, they took turns washing away the soot and grime from the fire. As Josie changed into fresh clothes, she caught sight of herself in the small mirror on her dresser. Her face was drawn with fatigue, her eyes haunted by all that had happened. Yet beneath the exhaustion, she saw something else, a determination that mirrored her father's. Samuel Carter hadn't backed down in the face of threats, and neither would she. When she emerged from her room, she found Forrest at the kitchen table, cleaning his revolver with practiced motions. He looked up as she entered, his expression softening. "I've been thinking," he said, setting the gun aside. "Maybe I shouldn't go to Denver right away." "Not with things heating up here," Josie shook her head. "No, you need to go. The marshal is our best hope for justice." She sat across from him. "Besides, I'm not helpless. I can handle myself for a few days. I know you can, but I'd feel better if you had some help while I'm gone." He hesitated. "I was thinking about asking Jack Peterson from the neighboring ranch to check in on you." "Jack's a good man," Josie agreed, "but he has his own troubles with the McKendricks. I don't want to drag him into this." "What about staying in town until I get back?" "At the hotel or with one of your father's friends," she smiled at his concern. "Forrest, this is my home. I'm not leaving it undefended, even for a few days." He recognized the stubborn set of her jaw and knew better than to argue further. "At least let me show you some tricks for securing the property. Make it harder for anyone to surprise you." They spent the remainder of the day setting up simple but effective defenses, tying bells to strings across likely approaches to the house, positioning reflective pieces of metal to catch movement in the moonlight, and ensuring all the firearms in the house were cleaned and loaded. As night fell, they shared a simple meal, both acutely aware that Forrest would be leaving at first light. The weight of their separation loomed over them, adding a bittersweet quality to their time together. "I'll be back before you know it," Forrest promised as they stood on the porch, the night sky ablaze with stars. 3 days to Denver, a day to speak with the marshal, and 3 days back. A week at most. Josie nodded, trying to ignore the knot of fear in her stomach. "Just be careful. The McKendricks might have men watching the trails. I know how to avoid unwanted attention." He pulled her close, his arms strong and reassuring around her. "And when I get back, we'll face whatever comes together." She looked up at him, memorizing the lines of his face, the warmth in his eyes. Forrest eyed the words caught in her throat, too new and fragile to be spoken aloud. He seemed to understand, bending to kiss her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "I know, Josie, me too." The night was the longest of Josie's life, every creak of the old house sending her hand to the rifle beside her bed. Dawn found her exhausted but resolute, determined not to show Forrest how much his departure worried her. She helped him prepare for the journey, packing food and extra ammunition, checking his horse's shoes and tack. They moved around each other with quiet efficiency, speaking little but communicating much through looks and touches. Finally, there was nothing left to do but say goodbye. Standing in the yard, Forrest's horse saddled and ready, they faced each other in the early morning light. "1 week," he said, holding her gaze. If I'm not back by then, ride to the Petersons and stay there until you hear from me." Josie nodded, memorizing his instructions even as she prayed she wouldn't need them. "I'll be waiting." He kissed her once more, then mounted his horse with fluid grace. "Bar the doors at night and remember what I showed you about the defenses." "I will." She stepped back, forcing a smile. "Now go, before we both find more reasons for you to stay." With a last look that held 1,000 unspoken promises, Forrest turned his horse toward the road and rode away. Josie watched until he disappeared over the horizon, then turned back to the house that suddenly felt too large and too empty. The first day passed without incident. Josie kept herself busy with chores, tending to the livestock and repairing what she could of the damage from the fire. The physical labor helped distract her from her worries, though her eyes frequently strayed to the road, irrationally hoping for Forrest's early return. That night, she double-checked all the doors and windows before retiring, the loaded rifle propped against her bedside. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by starts at every sound. The second day brought rain, a steady downpour that turned the ranch yard to mud and kept Josie mostly indoors. She used the time to catch up on mending and to review the ranch's financial records, searching for some solution to their impending debt crisis. The numbers remained stubbornly unchanged, however, offering no miraculous escape. As evening approached, the rain finally let up. Josie ventured out to check on the cattle, relieved to find them all present and accounted for. The wet ground would make it difficult for riders to approach quietly, she reasoned, which might offer some protection for the night. She was making her way back to the house, the setting sun casting long shadows across the landscape, when she heard the faint jingle of a bridle coming from the direction of the road. Instinctively, she ducked behind the woodpile, her hand going to the pistol at her hip. 3 riders appeared, moving slowly toward the house. In the failing light, she couldn't make out their faces, but their cautious approach suggested they weren't friendly visitors. Moving silently, staying in the shadows, Josie made her way to the barn. From there, she had a clearer view of the riders as they dismounted near the corral. Her heart sank as she recognized Elias McKendrick and the 2 men who had accompanied him on his previous visit. They were armed, and from the looks of their furtive movements, they weren't expecting a warm welcome. Josie weighed her options quickly. She could make a run for the house, where she had better weapons and more ammunition, but there was a good chance they would spot her. Or she could stay hidden and hope they left without causing trouble. The decision was made for her when the men split up, Elias heading for the house while his companions moved toward the barn. Josie pressed herself deeper into the shadows, praying they wouldn't search too thoroughly. As the men entered the barn, she slipped out the back door, keeping low as she made her way toward the house. She needed to get there before Elias discovered she was alone. Moving from shadow to shadow, she managed to reach the back porch unseen. Silently, she eased open the door and slipped inside, heading straight for the rifle cabinet. She loaded the Winchester, then took up a position by the front window where she could see Elias approaching. He was halfway across the yard when she cocked the rifle, the sound clearly audible in the quiet evening. Elias froze, his hand moving toward his gun. "That's far enough, McKendrick," Josie called, her voice steadier than she felt. "The next step you take will be your last." Elias raised his hands slightly, though his posture remained relaxed. "Now, Miss Carter, is that any way to greet a visitor? Visitors come during daylight hours and use the front gate. You and your men snuck in like thieves." He smiled, the expression not reaching his cold eyes. "Just concerned about you, all alone out here. Thought we'd check to make sure you were safe." "I'm perfectly safe with my rifle trained on your chest," Josie responded. "Now tell your men to come out of the barn nice and slow." Elias hesitated, clearly assessing his options. Then he called over his shoulder, "Boys, Miss Carter wants to speak with you." The 2 men emerged from the barn, looking warily toward the house. They moved to stand beside Elias, hands hovering near their weapons. "What do you really want, McKendrick?" Josie demanded. Same thing, I've always wanted to buy your water rights. He took a step forward, stopping when Josie raised the rifle slightly. But I'm also here to deliver a message. Evans was seen heading toward Denver. If he's going where I think he's going, it would be a mistake. A chill ran down Josie's spine. Is that a threat? Call it friendly advice. The marshal has bigger concerns than one rancher's unfortunate death, and even if he didn't. Elias shrugged meaningfully. Accidents happen on the trail all the time. The implication was clear: Forrest might never make it to Denver. Josie fought to keep her expression neutral, not wanting Elias to see how deeply his words affected her. My offer still stands, Elias continued. Sell to me now and you can leave this territory with enough money to start fresh somewhere else. No more trouble, no more worries. And if I refuse, his smile turned cold, then I can't guarantee what might happen to your property or to Evans when he returns, if he returns. Josie's finger tightened on the trigger. It would be so easy to end this right now, to make Elias pay for what he'd done to her father. But even in her anger, she knew that shooting him would only bring more trouble down on her head. Get off my land, she said instead, her voice like steel. And if anything happens to Forrest, I'll know who to blame. Elias studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. Have it your way, Miss Carter, but remember I tried to be reasonable. He backed away, gesturing for his men to follow. Think on my offer. I'll be back in 3 days for your answer. Josie kept the rifle trained on them until they mounted their horses and rode away, disappearing into the gathering darkness. Only when she was certain they were gone did she lower the weapon, her hands shaking with the aftermath of fear and rage. Elias's threat against Forrest terrified her. Had he already sent men after him? Was Forrest riding into a trap even now? There was no way to warn him, no way to know if he was safe or in danger. The helplessness of her situation washed over her in a wave that brought hot tears to her eyes. Please be safe, she whispered into the empty house. Please come back to me. The next 3 days passed in a haze of anxiety and watchfulness. Josie slept little, dividing her time between necessary ranch work and keeping vigilant for any sign of the McKendrick's return. Each morning, she scanned the horizon for Forrest's approach, and each evening brought fresh disappointment when he didn't appear. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, since the McKendrick's visit the 5th, since Forrest's departure, Josie was mending a fence in the north pasture when she heard approaching riders. Her heart leapt, hoping it was Forrest, then sank as she recognized Elias McKendrick's distinctive black stallion. This time he had brought 5 men with him. They approached openly, making no attempt to conceal their presence. Josie hurried back to the house, reaching it just before the riders arrived in the yard. She positioned herself on the porch, rifle in hand, as Elias dismounted. Unlike his previous visits, he made no pretense at civility. His expression was hard, his manner threatening. Time's up, Miss Carter, he called. Have you reconsidered my offer? My answer hasn't changed, Josie replied, the rifle steady in her hands. This land isn't for sale. Elias sighed dramatically. I was afraid you'd say that. Unfortunately, it means we'll have to do this the hard way. He gestured to his men, who began to spread out, encircling the house. Fear tightened Josie's throat, but she stood her ground. 6 against 1 isn't very sporting, McKendrick. This isn't a game, he replied coldly. It's business, and I always get what I want in the end. The standoff might have escalated further if not for the sound of a galloping horse approaching from the east. All eyes turned toward the new arrival. Josie's heart soared as she recognized Forrest, riding hard toward the ranch. He pulled his mount to a sliding stop at the edge of the yard, dust billowing around him as he dismounted in one fluid motion. Gentlemen, he greeted them, his voice deceptively casual as he walked toward the house. This seems like a rather unfriendly gathering. Elias's face darkened with anger. Evans, didn't expect to see you back so soon. Evidently, Forrest replied, positioning himself between Josie and the McKendrick men. His posture was relaxed, but Josie could see the tension in his shoulders, the readiness in his stance. I hear you've been threatening Miss Carter in my absence. Just doing a bit of business, Elias said smoothly. Nothing that concerns you. Everything about Miss Carter concerns me, Forrest countered, his hand resting casually near his holstered gun. Especially when it involves men who murdered her father. A heavy silence fell over the yard. Elias's men shifted nervously, looking to their boss for direction. That's a serious accusation, Elias finally said, his voice dangerously soft. It's more than an accusation. Forrest reached slowly into his vest pocket, pulling out an official-looking document. It's the finding of the Territorial Marshal's office based on witness testimony and evidence. Josie gasped softly. Forrest had succeeded in his mission. What evidence? Elias demanded, though uncertainty had crept into his expression. Pete Wilson's statement, for one, Forrest replied. He finally found his courage. Rode all the way to Denver to tell the marshal what he saw and heard the day Samuel died. This was clearly news to Elias, whose face paled visibly. Old Pete's gone senile. No one will believe him. They'll believe him when his testimony is combined with the letter Samuel wrote to the territorial governor just days before his death, detailing your threats against him. A letter that was delivered to the marshal's office last month. Josie stared at Forrest in shock. She'd had no idea her father had taken such precautions. You're bluffing, Elias said, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice now. Am I? Forrest held up the document. This is a warrant for your arrest, McKendrick, for the murder of Samuel Carter. The marshal and his deputies are a day's ride behind me. One of Elias's men broke and ran for his horse. Another followed quickly. Elias himself seemed frozen in place, his plans crumbling around him. I suggest you and your remaining men leave now, Forrest continued calmly. You might get a head start on the marshal if you ride hard. For a long moment, it seemed Elias might choose to fight. His hand hovered near his gun, his eyes darting between Forrest and Josie. Then, with a curse, he backed toward his horse. This isn't over, he spat as he mounted. Not by a long shot. For you, it is, Forrest replied evenly. The governor's been informed of your activities. The bank's been investigated. Your empire's falling, McKendrick. Best run while you can. With a final venomous glare, Elias spurred his horse and galloped away, his two remaining men close behind. As the dust settled, Josie lowered her rifle, her legs suddenly weak with relief. Forrest turned to her, his face softening as he took in her exhausted state. Are you all right? He asked, closing the distance between them in a few long strides. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. When he pulled her into his arms, she buried her face against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him, reassuring herself that he was really there. I was so worried, she finally managed. Elias said, he implied you might not make it back. It seems he underestimated me, Forrest replied, his arms tightening around her, and you held your ground admirably. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Is it true? About the warrant and the marshal, he smiled, a hint of mischief in his expression. Mostly. There is a warrant and the marshal is on his way, but he's probably 2 days behind me, not 1. I may have exaggerated that part a bit. A laugh escaped her, half joyful, half hysterical with relief. And my father's letter, real as can be. Your father was a smart man, Josie. He knew what he was facing and he took steps to protect you if the worst happened. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. He'd be proud of how you've handled things. The mention of her father brought a fresh wave of grief, tempered now by the knowledge that his killer would face justice. What happens now? Now we wait for the marshal. Once Elias is in custody, things should settle down around here. He guided her toward the porch steps, both of them sitting side by side. I have more news too. Good news. We could use some of that, Josie said with a tired smile. The territorial governor was quite disturbed by the evidence of corruption involving the McKendricks and the bank in Newton. He's ordered a full investigation, and in the meantime, all foreclosure proceedings against properties in this area have been suspended. Josie's eyes widened. You mean? The bank can't call in your loan, at least not for now. And once the investigation is complete, I suspect the original terms will be reinstated." He took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle patterns on her skin. "Your home is safe, Josie." The relief was overwhelming, bringing fresh tears to her eyes. For so long, she'd been fighting to keep her head above water, to hold onto the land that had been her father's dream. Now, suddenly, there was hope. "Thank you," she whispered, leaning her head against his shoulder. "For everything." They sat in companionable silence as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. It was a moment of peace in what had been a tumultuous time, a glimpse of what their future might hold. "I meant what I said the other night," Forrest said softly, breaking the silence. "I'm here to stay if you'll have me." Josie looked up at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "I'll have you," she replied, her voice steady and sure, "for as long as you want to stay." He cupped her face in his hands, his expression serious. "That might be a very long time, Josie Carter. I've spent 2 years trying to forget you and failed miserably. I don't intend to be parted from you again." Her heart swelled with an emotion too big for words. Instead of speaking, she leaned in and kissed him, pouring all her feelings into the gesture. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Forrest rested his forehead against hers. "Does that mean you'll marry me?" Josie laughed, surprised by the directness of his proposal. "That depends." "Are you asking?" "I am." He took both her hands in his. "Josephine Carter, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I can't offer you much beyond my heart and my hands, but both are yours if you want them." "Your heart and hands are exactly what I want," she answered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Forrest Evans, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he pulled her close once more. In that moment, despite all the challenges that lay ahead, Josie knew with absolute certainty that they would face them together and triumph. The marshal arrived 2 days later, as Forrest had predicted. With him came 3 deputies and a representative from the governor's office, all determined to see justice done in the matter of Samuel Carter's murder. Elias McKendrick had fled the territory, but his father, Travis, was arrested for his role in the corrupt dealings that had terrorized the valley for years. The bank manager was likewise taken into custody, and promises were made to investigate all foreclosures that had occurred under suspicious circumstances. For Josie and Forrest, the following weeks brought a return to the rhythms of ranch life, though now they worked side by side, building their future together. The cattle flourished under their combined care, and plans were made to expand the herd once the bank situation was fully resolved. They were married on a clear September day, with the mountains providing a majestic backdrop for their vows. It was a small ceremony, attended by neighboring ranchers and a few friends from town. Pete Wilson was there, looking older but standing tall, proud of the role he had played in bringing Samuel's killer to justice. As Josie and Forrest exchanged their promises, she felt her father's presence all around her in the land they stood upon, in the love that surrounded them, in the future they were building together. Later that evening, as they danced under the stars to the music of a borrowed fiddle, Josie rested her head against Forrest's chest, savoring the moment. "Happy," he murmured against her hair. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly, "though I still miss Pa." "I wish he could have been here today." "He was," Forrest said simply. "In every way that matters." She nodded, understanding the truth in his words. Samuel Carter had given her more than just a piece of land. He had given her the strength to fight for what was right, and the courage to love completely. As the music wound down, Forrest led her away from the celebration, toward the quiet of the house that would now be truly theirs. On the porch he paused, turning to face her in the silver moonlight. "Are you ready for this life, Josie?" he asked softly. "It won't always be easy." She smiled, reaching up to touch his face. "Nothing worth having ever is." Inside, in the privacy of their bedroom, they came together as husband and wife, their passion tempered by tenderness, their desire heightened by love long denied. When Josie cried out in momentary discomfort, Forrest stilled, concern in his eyes. "It hurts too much," he whispered, brushing her hair back from her flushed face. She shook her head, drawing him closer. "That's why I'm here to stay," she echoed his words from days before, her voice soft with emotion. "Some hurts are worth enduring for the joy that follows." His smile then, full of love and promise, was all the answer she needed. In that moment, Josie knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, bound by a love stronger than any hardship, deeper than any pain. The years that followed brought both joy and hardship, as is the way of life. The ranch prospered under their combined care, expanding as they acquired adjacent land that had once been controlled by the McKendricks. The bank honored the original terms of Samuel's loan, and within 5 years, they had paid it off completely. Their family grew as well. A son arrived first, named Samuel after the grandfather he would never meet but whose legacy he would inherit. 2 years later, a daughter, Emily, completed their family. The children thrived in the freedom of ranch life, growing strong and independent under their parents' loving guidance. Elias McKendrick was eventually captured in Mexico and returned to Colorado to face justice for Samuel's murder. His trial and subsequent hanging brought a sense of closure to Josie, though she found that revenge tasted less sweet than she had imagined. What mattered more was the life she and Forrest had built, the love they shared, and the future they were creating for their children. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Forrest surprised Josie with a small wooden box. Inside was a delicate gold locket, and within that, a miniature portrait of her father that Forrest had commissioned from an artist in Denver, based on a photograph Josie had kept. "So you can always keep him close," Forrest explained as he fastened the chain around her neck. Tears blurred her vision as she touched the precious gift. "Thank you," she whispered, unable to express how much the gesture meant to her. They stood together on the porch, watching their children play in the yard, the mountains a timeless backdrop to their life together. Forrest's arm around her waist was solid and reassuring, a constant in a world that had seen so much change. "Any regrets?" he asked softly, his voice carrying the same warmth it had when they'd first fallen in love. Josie looked up at him, at the face that had grown more dear to her with each passing year. Despite the hardships they had faced, the droughts that had threatened their cattle, the winter that had nearly taken their son, the endless work that ranch life demanded, she couldn't imagine any other path. "Not one," she answered truthfully. "Every step, every struggle led us here." "How could I regret that?" Forrest's smile, still capable of making her heart skip a beat after all these years, was her reward. "I love you, Josie Evans, more today than yesterday, but not as much as tomorrow." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Josie leaned into her husband's embrace, content in the knowledge that they had built something enduring, a love strong enough to weather any storm, a legacy worthy of the man whose sacrifice had made it all possible. In the distance, their children's laughter mingled with the evening birdsong, a sweet harmony that spoke of promises kept and dreams fulfilled. It wasn't always the life Josie had imagined for herself, but standing here now, surrounded by love and the fruits of their labor, she knew it was exactly the life she was meant to have. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.